All right, we're live. Happy Monday.
Hello, another Monday. It is the
Interesting
20.
weekend.
Yeah, yeah, I was going to say. We have
Interesting.
interesting macro Monday tidbits today. There's a laundry list of central bank talking heads. So, like, for example, Fed governors and such on the economic calendar that a large enough, a statistically significant number of market participants pay attention to these things across different asset classes, different markets around the world. Ooh, watch is talking to me. The point I'm trying to get down to here is that the I think the price action is reflecting that we're in a kind of a wait and see as these confluences of events. We've got the debt ceiling debate here in the U.S. We've got the Federal Reserve trying to be seen to tackle inflation, but also not put a chokehold or a stranglehold on the economy. Uh, where their risk, but the risk is that credit gets tight to credit, and I should say the access to credit that a lot of small and medium sized business rely on in different parts of their business cycle and their revenue cycle, and how often they get paid, and et cetera, et cetera. If access to credit continues to tighten, and it tightens to the extent that people can't get it for any reason, it's likely to have a bit of a domino effect, and I think that's something that people are largely concerned with. I mean, if it's on my radar, then it's probably on a few other people's radar. So I just think that until we get some sort of resolution, or so I think what we're looking for, or what I'm looking for some resolution, not that the resolution really matters. Nothing's really going to change, and I'm not trying to sound cynical. I'm talking about the debt ceiling here. Is that the government is still going to continue to spend? It's still going to spend. That money's going to come from it's going to come from printing, because tax receipts certainly aren't going to cover it. So they'll find a way to orchestrate and put a sequence of events together that give them the political clearance, in a manner of speaking, to go ahead and continue operating. And that's all fine and well and good. And what I'm trying to get down to with this particular point is, once we get some sort of quote unquote resolution, this you know this particular wet blanket gets lifted off, and I think we get a direction, which is the next thing. Is we're looking for direction. Our asset prices going higher because all of the right ingredients are there, or are they going lower in the short term while people unwind and correct and rethink how they want to allocate and be positioned for what they think is coming for the rest of the year, economically speaking? So that's my thought on, like high level for today's discussion.
Yeah, so it
And
looks like
look at that.
there's a lot of Fed speakers today, and here you can see a zero hedge. No fewer than 11 global central bankers are jostling for attention from the world's media today.
Boy.
And basically saying the message from all the central bank babble is likely to be confusion, UBS. So we'll see what they talk about. They'll probably talk about the debt ceiling and the importance of raising the debt ceiling. I don't know. This all gets so tiresome because at the end of the day, they don't have a choice. It's either raise the debt ceiling or default. And I think what's interesting for us here is crypto has entered the discussion in a big way, as this guy who is the apparent president of the United States comes out and basically says he won't do a debt ceiling deal that favors wealthy tax evaders. He's even called them tax cheats. We've talked about this before. Participating in this space for so long and doing everything you can to be compliant and pay your taxes, and then you have Biden come out and call you a tax evader is beyond insulting. But here we are. I think the bigger issue with all this is that these guys they'll never blame this on themselves. They always got to find a scapegoat, and right now it appears to be crypto. And so, they're printing trillions and blaming Bitcoin. All right, this is exactly why Bitcoin was created, because these guys cannot control their spending. They've got a huge spending problem. If they default on the debt, all they need to do is run a balanced budget, right? Like if I default on my debt, I got to make some changes. They're not talking about that at all. Instead, what they're talking about is crypto quote unquote tax cheats. And the only thing that there could be potentially talking about is a wash trading rule, where what's different in crypto than the stock market is you can sell, just say, sell Bitcoin. If you've got a loss, capture that loss and then buy Bitcoin back immediately. That's not a tax cheat. It's not a tax evader. That's just the rule, right? And in stocks, you can do that, but you have to wait 30 days, right? And so this isn't like a loophole or anything like they make it seem to be like. And by the way, it's not necessarily like a good thing too. Like if you're doing this, you've lost money, right? You've made an investment. The investment is gone down. You're taking a loss. This happens in stocks. This happens in any sort of market. And, to get up there and say you won't cut a debt ceiling deal because of crypto traders is absurd. I mean, it just tells you that they've lost it. They've completely lost the narrative here.
I think it's interesting to see how or who the administration is picking on. I mean, publicly they're willing to point the finger at crypto. They're calling people tax cheats in this context. One unfortunate thing I think is how many of the constituents on that side know what wash trading is. So there's a reason they don't pick out and call out the wash trading rule, because the average person doesn't know what these things are. Okay, the average person is. I don't like saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Like the average person is they're hooked on one headline to the next, to the next, to the next, and it's the revolving door of insanity. Okay, and the irony here is that while it doesn't feel nice, I read this stuff and I think, man, after all the effort, like you very clearly described, to provide every last shred of documentation around every which way from Sunday that I've participated in the crypto market and how much tax I ended up paying, and which is a law on the books put there by government, that there are certain types of transactions that you're able to benefit from a tax loss, or take the loss that you incurred in a particular accounting period and be able to benefit from a tax perspective. In any other, and there are hundreds of thousands of other ways to also benefit from tax losses. But what you're not seeing is how corporations can write off losses and benefit from tax. They're not calling out all of the corporate tax benefits. They're not calling out all of the other tax benefits that all of their constituents benefit from every single day of the year. They're choosing their words very carefully. They're picking on
Okay, we lost Ted. The analogy that when he was talking, I thought of it's similar to when, Hillary Clinton got on stage and called Trump out for his taxes, and Trump got up there and said, "Look, I'm just, I'm smart. Of course, I don't pay taxes because I get depreciation from my real estate." That's not being a tax cheat. That's being, a businessman and smart to. It's being practical. And like the analogy I was making, Ted, is when Hillary Clinton got up there on the presidential debate and tried to blame Trump for his taxes. And I was saying that it's not that he's, evading taxes or not doing it. He's just applying by the rules they make. And when they talk about this in particular, don't think for a second they're not doing it too. And I think there's no coincidence that, look, what happened was FTX went under. FTX was kind of a piggy bank for a lot of these people. And, who knows what they were doing through that platform, but their little toy got taken away. And right after that, they all come out in this anti-crypto stance. Well, I don't think that's a coincidence, right? And I think that'll come out. That's just speculation, but based off, an understanding of everything going on. But I don't think it's speculation that their little toy got taken away, and now they're all fussy about it, right? And so, to blame crypto though for this, to not reach a debt ceiling deal, you're talking about, and in the same boat, I think I've got a tweet pulled up right here, is they come out and say they're not going to do a deal unless, we come after crypto tax evaders, and then they come out and say the White House said that if they don't do a deal, the stock market's going to plunge by 45% and unemployment would shoot up by 5%. So they're saying this is going to happen, but they're not negotiating because of crypto tax traders. It's just none of it makes any sense, right? And if you look at this stuff and start to pay attention at all, you got to ask yourself, what is really going on? I mean, the White House came out and said this. This isn't radar hits or whatever this account is. This was something the White House came out and said after they said they're not going to negotiate because of crypto taxes. It's just, I think it's just fear. That's what it is. They want to
Oh, it is.
make people uncomfortable, make people worry that they're not going to get Social Security or anything. There's a deal on the table right now that protects all of that. Biden is not negotiating, and you got to wonder why. There's a lot more to this than meets the eye. At some point, they will default on their debt. It's just a matter of time, right? And so either they do it in 2 weeks or they do it in 2 years. The spending is out of control. They need to address that if this is ever going to get at all fixed, but they don't seem to want to do that. Instead, what they want to do is blame the problems they created on anything and everybody else. And I think people are seeing that. And I think people get tired of it.
Yeah. Another thing I haven't heard coming out of the current administration is how many people like the president and people in Congress who took campaign donations from scam banks for fraud and FTX, how many of them have returned that money that they took?
It's a good question.
None.
I think there was a couple.
Okay.
There was a couple.
Hey, I can be wrong too. What I'm trying
to
get at is that they're not. I think your theory is sound that the campaign contribution machine it blew up. The campaign contribution toy got blown up, and now to create cover for all of the people who benefited financially from it, they now point the finger. This is classic politics where you always got to be ready for somebody to stab you in the back, and you got to be ready to stab someone in the back because they will do it to you first if you don't do it. This is just classic politics. I mean, I don't want to sound like a doomsday like glass half empty kind of thing, but what's somewhat ironic about that thing you're showing on the screen now is that in one breath we've got the president's talking about crypto traders and tax cheats and that we are tax cheats, etc. Yet crypto assets make up a statistically insignificant amount of market capitalization in terms of like global assets and global trade and financial markets. And then in this breath, they're saying we're going to let the stock market. Now, how many of the constituents have been contributing to their 401ks every 2 weeks? They've been hitting the bid, as they say, every 2 weeks for years and years and years now. And here, their beloved president is going to stonewall and not negotiate and watch their retirement. So you see how stupid this is, that they would one breath pick on. But here's the last part of this is that it doesn't matter to Wall Street whether the stock market corrects 45% or drops or blows up or implodes or whatever fancy words you want to use for the stock market retracing a move lower or moving lower in price. Is that the irony here is that the banking lobby and all of the Wall Street heavy hitters are able to position so that whichever way the market moves, they make money. So they've spent money to attack crypto. They've attacked they've attacked banks that were crypto friendly. They don't care necessarily. And if the market cycle is now down, they're positioned for that. If the market cycle turns around and it starts to move the other way, they're going to be positioned for that. So it's to me, it's ironic. And
Well, and they
you know
know
what I mean?
there's one side that knows which way it's going to go. There could be a deal today, and it would be over. But that's what's frustrating about this is they can basically hold everybody hostage while they try to get more spending. And I'm not gonna, it's not. I'm a believer that there should be less government spending. I think it's egregious. I think most of it gets wasted. I think a lot of it gets kicked around and kicked back in certain ways. I mean, I don't think it's necessary. I think you could get rid of 75% of the government and we'd still be fine. It's kind of like Elon and Twitter. There's a lot of people sitting around not doing a whole lot, collecting paychecks and pensions. It's not to say everybody, but there's a lot of that. It's like anything. If the government had to be run like a company, it would be bankrupt. I mean, it's unbelievable that they get away with this for so long. But in the end, you got to question what they're really going for. What's the real intent here? And if they don't reach a deal, which they will, they always do, but we'll see how it plays out. I just think it's interesting that the thing that I wanted to bring to attention is that on the one hand, crypto's entered the mainstream, and right now it's an attack. But what does this look like over a 2 to 3 to 5 year period? I think we'll look back on this and go, man, that was crazy. I don't think it stops crypto's inevitable path, right? I think this is just short-term noise in the long-term projection of crypto. And you've got a market that's been hit by, brutal series of events in 2022, but has still bounced back and is now, right after all that, we got kicked, we got beat up, we got pushed down, and we're on the ground trying to get back up, and we're getting gut punched by our government, right? And in the face of all of that, still crypto is still persisting and will continue to persist. And if the United States wants to participate in that, they better, think clearly about the route they're taking now, because this is going to happen across the rest of the world. And the United States can either be a part of it or get left behind. And that's also another frustrating thing to watch. And somebody had a good point. I watched a video last night. I forget what the guy's name, but he goes, I asked ChatGPT was talking about Elizabeth Warren coming out against crypto. He goes, has there ever been a politician that's ever come out against freedom, and won, right? Like, that's what she's doing. She's literally coming out with her anti-crypto army against individuals' freedoms to own assets. It's insane. It really is. I mean, that's the state of the world we live in today.
Just the thing I always come back to is that politicians, ironically enough, are really good data-driven decision makers. They don't speak what they feel. Like if they were traders, like if not traitors, but traders.
No, that applies.
Okay. So if they were trading assets, they would be applying the same method of looking at data and saying, well, the data says blah, blah, blah. And I just, it took me a long time to get it through my thick skull that when politicians speak, they've done the research, their people have done the research and said, your talking points are, the data suggests, your polling indicates that, and I think it was you that talked about, Target and that they're just looking at data and they're making some decisions about what type of products and how type of placement they're going to put in their retail stores. And yeah, there might be some short-term hubbub and flaring up and, from from, we the underlings in the general public, but we the underlings in the general public are fickle. We have short-term memory problems, and we get distracted as a species, much less a society, very quickly with the next shiny object. So this shiny object syndrome in the public is an advantage when you're in politics. If you can tune in and understand, and you don't even need to look at all data. You just need to look at some, because the margin of error is in your favor almost always. Like polling, they say, oh, well, plus or minus 3%, and whatever. It doesn't even matter. The margin of error is insignificant. The point I'm trying to get to is that politicians are very smart in some ways because they look at data and they don't let their own personal feelings get in the way, in a manner of speaking. So Elizabeth Warren may not like any of this stuff. I mean, I can't imagine what it would be like if I were in a position where the people that were paying for my, all of the lobbyists and all the campaign contribution money that I was taking as a politician, and I got my marching orders, and I'd have, I'm trying to imagine what it would be like for me if I had to stand in front of people and talk, or take an anti-Bitcoin stance, for example, because I was being paid to do so.
Well, what they should do, what would be nice, is if, in disclosure forms or whenever Senator Warren got up to talk on the screen, it listed her donors. It's like you and I talking, like we can very clearly, that we're Bitcoin and crypto enthusiasts and owners. So everything we say comes from, the perspective of, one, we believe in the technology, and two, it benefits our portfolios for crypto to do well. It's not anything other than, look, you wouldn't invest in it if you didn't believe in it, but it would be awful nice to have that on a TV or a tweet. If Elon Musk would institute that into Twitter to say, here was Senator Warren's statement. Here's Senator Warren's list of campaign donors. And then you could go and look and see, okay, well, she's got a lot of big banks supporting her. So, maybe we should take what she says with a grain of salt and not, blame crypto, but look at who's paying her to say this stuff. I think we should all do that. I think that's a good idea, actually.
This happened with Brad Sherman's little crypto bros printed $1 trillion out of thin air, and maybe we do too, but we're the U.S. government. There was some data was published, I think, on Twitter that all like a statistically significant, or the lion's share of his donor base were in the part of the traditional finance banking lobby, who were basically telling him, you need to talk down this thing because it is a direct threat to one of the core, or one of the fundamental DNA level aspects of the traditional finance and banking business, which is being the middleman and being the money changer, between individuals. Every time you buy something, they get a little piece here on the front end, they get a little piece in the middle, they get a little piece on the back end. They've got their hands on both sides of the transaction. I mean, maybe I'm just in the wrong business. Maybe I got all this wrong and I need to just sell everything and go work for JP Morgan.
I think there's a difference between what you and I do and what people in the public sector do versus, the private sector do versus, the public. Look, that information should be available instantly to anybody that chooses to look at it. Because, and for every politician, right, we should know who funds their campaigns, and it should be with a click of a button. If anybody says something, if Trump says something, if Biden says something, if Vivek says something, if RFK says something, we should know who's funding their, who their largest donors are.
Wouldn't a blockchain be the great solution, or wouldn't smart contracts could be recorded in the public ledger, the great ledger fortress in the sky, so to speak, or in the etherverse, and have all of that information available, meaning verifiably so, just like a transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain is verifiably so. You can verify it independently without having to trust another person. If I wanted to know who contributed to Sherman's campaign, and maybe there's an app for that, and maybe there's a proof of work blockchain that, I don't know. I'm just,
I think
just thinking out loud.
That's a great idea, but I think it could be as simple as under every public politician's Twitter handle,
even better.
There's just a link and it just said donors, or lobbyists, lobbying group. You could make it that simple, that have contributed to their campaign. I mean, I think the information's out there. It should just be attached to their public social media accounts so you can see it. It's just like, take Amazon, for instance. Everything on Amazon made in China should be labeled made in China, like a little flag of where the product was made, so people can make an informed decision about what they're buying, right? This stuff is not hard to implement, and there's reasons that it's not, by the way. We're not the first people to ever think of this, I'm sure, right? There's probably a lot of pressure not to do that for obvious reasons, right? But as we go, if we're looking for trust, right? Because that's the big problem right now, and that's why crypto exists, because you don't have to trust any of these people. But if you want to get some semblance of society back, these public officials need to be transparent, and we need to understand where they're coming from. Otherwise, we're going to end up in a situation where we're at now. Nobody trusts any of them.
Yeah, it's. I mean, if you're paying attention, then I find it difficult. I've been paying attention for a while, and I find that my ability to trust, a lot of things it's challenged. It's a bit strained, I'll call it. But thankfully, I don't know if that's even the right word. I guess realistically, a lot of what we see and read and hear is just hyperbole and hot air, and I guess perhaps ironically, a lot of what people say, like in politics, when you say things, not very much happens, which is sometimes good and sometimes not good. Probably not good most of the time, but whatever. I mean, if we're talking about like actually affecting change, we get every year, and in every election cycle, there's promise after promise after promise after promise. I mean, I'm certainly not one that's going out, starting a campaign, putting forth the solutions that I have, because I don't want. That's not a battle I want to fight, quite frankly. So
yeah, and the other thing too is like if all that information was readily, easily available, companies might think twice before donating an absolute metric ton of money to push their nefarious wants and needs. But I just think it's one of those things that as we move forward, especially with AI, you're going to have a hard time trusting anything. I think there's going to be a lot of noise and distractions out there. But as it relates to crypto, you got to remember, nothing changes any of it, right? Anything that these people do is just noise in the long term. So I think for today, that's probably a good spot to wrap it up. You got a lot of macro stuff, a lot of people talking this week. The debt ceiling is going to be front and center. We'll see if they talk about crypto more. My guess is that was a veiled hint at something else they don't want. I think there's some, stuff with oil going on, and look,
it's misdirection. Yeah, if you want my opinion, it's all misdirection. And look over here, and equally as important is what they're not talking about. They're not talking about all of the money that people took from FTX and scam banks for fraud. They're not talking about the Strategic Petroleum Oil Reserve issues. They're not talking about the crumbling. I'm not going to use their language. There's allegedly in the U.S. there's we have aging infrastructure, like our roads and bridges and our transportation infrastructure. We have power grid infrastructure that needs to be updated. This whole wind and solar thing has been a complete disaster. Our standard of living is at risk. Like I'm talking, like without electricity, we go back to the Stone Age. And the idea that wind and solar are going to somehow be the primary, I don't know how it happens.
It's a fugazi. It doesn't exist.
Okay.
It's literally a joke.
They're not talking about these things today. What they're talking about today is and remember, I think it was Naval on Twitter, Naval. You can just look for Naval. It's like the last tweet I saw from him was that there is no news. There's only narrative. Okay, so the narrative is what it is today because it is on the minds of the most people. So the politicians are they're like a magnet, and wherever the highest concentration of metal is, the magnet goes. Okay, and it's that's just the way it is. And I mean, we're talking about like the magnitude of these things is hard to comprehend. So the narrative is, and the political mouthpieces are going to chase the narrative because they have to.
Well,
Or
yeah,
else,
it's like that example I talked about Target. Like, they're doing all these companies now are marketing towards LGBTQ and the trans community, and a lot of that is about pushing a woke narrative, right? But also a lot about is looking at demographics, changing demographics, and what they're seeing is there's more and more people that are identifying as gay, lesbian, trans, whether or not that is a reflection of society or is true. They're looking at data and they're seeing this and they're saying, okay, we've got to, adapt our advertising strategy to capture that demographic. So, as much as anybody wants to sit here and say, Bud Light, which they made a colossal mistake, but all these companies are looking at the same thing. I think it's a combination of wanting to push a narrative and then also looking at changing demographics as well. So there's a lot that goes into all this, but back to politicians, they do the same thing. They don't just say so, these companies don't care about anybody's personal preferences. They care about numbers, right? And they care about, politicians are the same way. There's nobody out there pressing this stuff because if their numbers don't say it's a good thing to talk about, they don't talk about it. So always important to keep in mind, but we'll watch this week. We'll watch the debt ceiling. Hopefully there's a resolution. If there's not, there's not. Long term, it doesn't matter for Bitcoin at all. So,
right. The last thing that I wanted to express is that as we see price go sideways here, it may pull back a little bit. Bitcoin fundamentals have never been stronger, quite frankly. Like the reason it exists to protect against debasement. The government is going to spend money, period. Whether it's through some magical debt ceiling resolution or some other facility, more money is going to keep getting pumped into the system because it's the only way to move forward in the current setup. It just is. And Raoul Pal talks about this. You don't have to take my word for it. The point I'm trying to get to is that Bitcoin may, in US dollar terms, may be priced a little bit, better or lower over the next weeks, months, who knows? It's do your own research, not financial advice. But if you're long-term thinking, if you are long-term thinking 3, 5, 10 years out, then you're not concerned about sideways or price pullbacks. You look at those as buying opportunities, just like a good hedge fund manager or a Wall Street portfolio manager would say, oh, look, this fundamentally sound asset is in the media under some false BS narrative. Prices have pulled back. It's on sale. We're gonna acquire more because it matches our thesis and all that good stuff. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say about Bitcoin.
That's right though. There's any of this stuff that's happening now is a distraction long term. It's just noise. So with that, we'll wrap it up and we'll throw our disclaimer up. Nothing Ted or I or say is financial advice, nor legal nor accounting advice. Anything we do is for entertainment and education. If you enter these markets, you do so at your own risk. And with that